Hello, Americans. It's Constitution time. My name is Kent McNall. It's Thursday, October 15th, 2020, and I welcome you to the inaugural program of Constitution Time. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, a television anchor, someone I watch, posed a question to the audience. She said, "Have you ever thought about what you would do if your democracy was really and truly in trouble, in peril, existential peril?" She said, "Well, you're doing it right now. Whatever you're doing, that's what you would do, because that's where we are and that's what's happening." And that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, because I'd been feeling that way, and I realized that she was right. I was yelling at the TV. That's all I was doing about a really big problem that I perceive. So I thought about that quite a bit, and the result of my thought was Constitution Time, a channel I created on YouTube, and a program that I hope will bring Americans together to discuss the very real nature of the problem that we all face together. A real threat to our democracy, a real threat to our form of government and our way of life. So, this is the inaugural show, and on this show and tomorrow's show, I'm going to lay out the reasons that I believe that our democracy is in some peril. You know, we are extremely fortunate as a country in many, many ways. Very blessed. And I know that, like me, you probably love your country very much, although sometimes it takes a little danger to make you realize how much you love something. The founders of our country were brilliant, brilliant men, and amazingly so. And they really came up with something unique and precious in the world, our form of government. The way that we, as men, men and women, people, choose to govern ourselves. And they made that happen through our Constitution. And our Constitution really is an amazing, amazing thing. It's something that really hadn't been seen before in the world. And even to this time, we have many governments that have tried to replicate what we have, but we are the creators of it, and we are have been the number one champion of it. I have to admit to you something that's kind of the foundation stone of this program, which is that I am not a constitutional expert. And I even chose not to do a huge amount of extra research and learning about the Constitution, because I believe that I know about what most Americans know. I have some education beyond high school and took some history classes and some government classes, but not a huge amount. And it's been a subject of discussion between me and friends, colleagues many times. But I'm not an expert. And I'm also not an expert at teaching. So I'm not really here to teach. I'm here to discuss. I'm here to interact with people that will come on the show, maybe get into chat, and have different topics that people will be interested in discussing, hopefully in what I hope will be a nonpartisan fashion. But, it's hard to keep that out of things these days. So we'll see how that goes, because certainly these are subjects of passion among all of us Americans. We feel very strongly about our way of life, our government, our Constitution. But our Constitution is a wonderful thing, and it set up a form of government with three key branches at the federal level, at the national level, if you will: the executive branch, the judiciary, the courts, and the legislative branch, which is the Congress and the Senate. I should say the House of Representatives and the Senate. And it created a system of checks and balances and separation of powers that, one way and another, over our many years as a country, many in our terms, but not necessarily a huge number in terms of the history of civilization. We're still a young country, and our form of government is still something new in the world. But one way and another, that system of separation of powers and checks and balances has kept us going as a democracy. And by the way, that's something just to delve into a little bit. I say our democracy is in danger. What do I mean by that? Well, the United States is a democracy, at least one of several recognized forms of democracy, representative democracy. But we're also a republic because we are made up of 50 states, each of which has their own state government and rights as states. And the rights of states, just as the rights of people, were very important to our founders. And there's a lot that I have learned over the past couple of years as we've been perhaps wrestling with and struggling more with these issues as a people than we have ever before. And, I've always known, for example, about the Electoral College, which is part of our Constitution that really says here's how new executives will be elected. And I think, but like most people, I knew about the Electoral College. I knew it was there. And I remember being young in the 72 election and the first time I heard them talk about the Electoral College. But I never truly realized that the Electoral College is, in fact, the only way that the executive, the president, gets elected. And that's come into play very, very strongly in recent elections, where before it had rarely ever been as important as it is now. And I don't know how many times it actually might have decided the presidency over the popular vote. I think maybe 2 or 3 times, but that's such an important thing. Now it's part of the Constitution. Our Constitution not only lays out how our government will work, but it's what says the rights that we have as a people and the rights that were important to our founders, our ancestors back then, still remain very, very important to us. The right to practice the religion that we want to practice, the right to bear arms, the right to free speech, and so many important rights. And those rights have been added to over the years through amendments to the Constitution. So it's an amazing document, but it's an amazing construct for a free people to govern themselves. And it really is precious, and it really is something worth preserving. And it really is in danger right now, more than ever before, perhaps, from outside and from inside our country. So in this evening's show, I want to go over half of my very large list of reasons that I feel that our democracy is in real trouble. And part of that has to be defining what real trouble is. And I think that it's in existential trouble, but at minimum, it's in peril of being deeply changed in ways that will be very difficult to undo. And it's in danger of having precedents set that also will be very, very difficult to undo in the future. So I will add to that definition as we go along. In terms of interacting with the show, at the end of the prepared part of the show, I will look and see if we have any audience and see if we have any chatter that's happened. If you're in YouTube watching the show, you have a way to chat with each other. And if we have any, that'll be fine. If we don't, that's fine too. But over time, I hope that our audience will grow and that we'll have a lot more chances to interact. And I will invite people onto the show to get into Zoom and appear as part of the live stream and as part of the recorded video. And we'll look very much forward to that and very much forward to enlightened interaction between Americans, because that, I think, is what we have to do now. We have to think as Americans above our own parties or others' interests that we have in order to preserve what we have as a country and as a people. Okay, I'm going to dive in and talk about, and by the way, I also want full disclosure. I'll get better at this, I will, but as a result of that challenge that news personality put out there for her audience, I'm sitting here doing things I have never done before with lots and lots of buttons to push And I suspect I will push at least one wrong at some point, so we'll see how that goes. All right, so the first reason that I feel that we've got trouble is what I call ultimate partisanship. Partisanship has become a bigger and bigger force in our society and in our government in recent years. Gradually, I would say over my lifetime, we've just seen partisanship, which has always been there. I mean, our chambers of government have always been lively with really serious debate and dissension and disagreement, and back in our founding days, people calling each other out with their muskets and whatever, but never to the point where there's ultimate partisanship. I mean, lemmings going over the cliff with the leader partisanship, and the inability to get anything worthy done. That's what we're seeing now. It's an accomplishment when our Congress manages to pass the quarterly emergency spending bill because they can't come to agreement on the actual annual budget. It's hard to remember the last really important, significant piece of legislation that was put through on something critically important to the country. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to see how that's going to happen again with the current state of things. But we are capable of so much more. But ultimate partisanship results in a lot of really bad things that we've been seeing. It results in things that should be corrected not being corrected, things that should be investigated and stopped not being investigated and stopped. It results in deadlock. It results in nothing being done. Ultimate partisanship is something that's gotten us into some real hot water, I think, and something that will continue to do so until we find a way to break that loggerhead. And by the way, one of the things that we'll be doing as part of the program is we'll be finding, hopefully together, solutions that hopefully, on one end is yelling at the TV, which isn't much of a solution at all, and at the other end is taking up arms, which probably isn't a great solution either. In the middle, there's got to be things that we can do. There are things that we can do that we can figure out together. Okay. Going to move on to number 2. And I know this could be very controversial for many, but the willing election of an executive of questionable character and temperament is something I think that has got us in some hot water as well. And by the way, many of these things, many of these problems, these reasons didn't start with the current administration or the current Congress. They started quite some time ago, perhaps over the last 30 or 40 years. And some of them go back to the roots of our country, but just are so amplified and out of proportion and context that they become the level of problem that they are. But no one can really turn away from the fact that this is the situation that we're in right now. And even if you're a great fan of our executive, there's usually, oh yeah, I don't like this and this, but he does this. And sometimes we just can't overlook what happens when we put something precious in the hands of someone who is not the right kind of person to be there. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I will say one thing about this show. I do not want it to become another bashing session. We spend way too much time bashing the heck out of each other. That's why I'm using the term executive, by the way. The executive branch of government is a very, very important branch of government, and perhaps the most important in many ways. That's the ultimate leadership of our our country. So I hope very much to avoid that. And I hope to avoid leaving the slides up too long, by the way. I'm really working on that with the show here. Okay. This is one of the reasons that I think has really come to the fore lately. The self-made rules of the branches of government, particularly of Congress, are literally usurping the power of that the Constitution provides, and are becoming a very great problem. And what do I mean by this? Well, it's almost like in the current incarnation of the Congress, it's almost like we have two presidents. We have one that's in the executive branch. We have another one in the Senate who has almost as much or more control than the executive because of the rules of the Congress, because of filibuster rules and rule where the filibuster has been suspended, and the ability of the leader of the majority to keep things from even coming to the Senate floor to be voted on or debated. Those are not constitutional in nature. Those rules of the Senate are not written into the Constitution. Those are made by the Senate. And did the founders of our country intend for one person in one of the branches to have so much power? I don't think so. And this is one of those things that goes back well before the current incarnation of the Senate. In fact, I think it was someone from the former leader from the opposing party that created some of these rules that now, because of the short-sightedness of that, are biting all of us. Nothing can get done. Hundreds of bills just waiting to be voted on because the rules allow one person to have that much power, that much authority. So that's one that I think is a big threat right now. Number 4 on my list is the checks and balances that I spoke of earlier between the branches of government are being undermined by a lack of ability to enforce the checks and balances. So what are the checks and balances? First of all, what are the responsibilities of the three branches? Well, the executive branch is in charge of the military, in charge of the many departments that report up to the president through his cabinet. Not only the armed forces, but all of the law enforcement at the federal level. Many other responsibilities reside with the executive aside from that, including foreign relations, many other things. Congress has the power of the purse. The House of Representatives particularly, creates and approves the budget, sends it along to the Senate, sends it along to the executive. And that's the only way that money is supposed to be approved for spending. The Senate has many powers, including the power to keep power between the states equal, even though populations really vary between the largest state and the smallest state. And that was really important to the founders. The founding states wanted to make sure they did not get rolled over by the most populous states. One of the most important powers that they have is being seen right now, the power to name the justices of the Supreme Court. But one of the powers that they also have is oversight. The Congress, the Senate, has oversight of the other branches of government, in particular the executive branch. And that's a really, really important power. And it's being undermined by the fact that the executive branch or any other branch, all they have to say is, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to ignore your powers of oversight. We're not going to respond to your powers of oversight. And in so doing, they make that oversight meaningless in the context of what needs to be done if there is a problem. And this has pointed out a real crack in our system of government, that all someone has to do is say no. And oversight goes out the window, at least until it's too late to do anything real about it, because you do have another one that will come up here in a moment is you can put things through the courts, but incredible length of time needed to get through the courts. And by the way, the same folks that are saying no to the power of oversight may simply say no to the courts. That's somewhat of the precedent that's being set right now. So this is one that I think is very important. And many of these work hand in hand and amplify each other. So number 5 is that slow-moving judiciary, which becomes the only solution to some of these problems. And part of that problem is that apparently you can simply flood the judiciary with case after case after case after case on the same topic to keep anything from happening, to keep anything from really moving forward. Well, we don't think they should be able to do oversight because of this. Yes, they can do oversight because of that. Well, wait a minute. Then how about this over here? And on and on and on. Years. And some of the things that oversight needs to happen on needed to be resolved immediately, and they can't be. And that's a door that that swings both ways. That's not just a one-way street. This party is the majority now. Next year, this party will be in the majority, and it all starts over again. And I think that's something that's got to be solved, because we can't wait for years for some of these things to keep going on while we mess around in the courts. One of the most disturbing that we're living through right now, and as of this date, we're just a little bit more than 2 weeks from our next executive election. But our free, fair elections, the cornerstone of our democracy, is being directly undermined by powers from without and from within. Things that happened in the last election are happening again, and new things that have never happened before when it comes to voter suppression are happening now. Voter suppression, again, didn't start with this administration, didn't start with this Congress, been going on for a very, very long time. Usually directed at minorities, now directed at everyone in many states. And of course, our current pandemic doesn't make that any easier, but we have state governments and agencies making it harder for people to vote, even in the middle of this pandemic. And I hope that will resolve itself, but odds are it's not going to resolve itself by itself. Our elections must be totally protected and unassailable by any branch of government, by any executive order. And some of the things we're seeing are really, really disturbing and a big danger to our democracy. Something we've all watched, but with a mixture of disbelief and amusement, is the abandonment of the codes of conduct that at some level have always been there in our federal government and between the parties that have to run things. And those codes of conduct may be written, they may be unwritten. We're seeing one play out right now with the Senate approval of a new justice to the Supreme Court. That's being done in a way completely opposite of what happened a few years ago. I don't want to go into the details of that, but it turns out there is a lot that has to happen and has happened in the past only by these codes of conduct and courtesy between the branches and within the branches. And that courtesy has gone by the wayside. And the difficulty with that is that important imbalances are now being created. A lot of our success has been because there has been balance. If a party is put into all three, a party all of a sudden is in charge of the House of Representatives and the Senate and the presidency, we tend to correct that almost in the next election. That rarely goes beyond even the first 2 years of that term. I know that I think that President Clinton had that, and the current executive had that in his first 2 years, all three of those. But the American people tend to go, well, that's imbalanced, and we will correct that imbalance. But if we get into a situation where all four or three of the four, between the Supreme Court, the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the executive, have not only a majority, but a majority that won't be gotten rid of for a long, long time, I think that becomes a threat to our system of government and our democracy. And if too many things have been done by the codes of conduct rather than by law, then obviously those codes of conduct now have to be made into law. One of the most troubling of the things that I see is the erasure of the bright line between the executive and the Department of Justice. This is, in my mind, a bit of a crack in the Constitution, because while there is separation of power, all of the enforcement capability resides with the executive branch. The Congress has no police force or authority to enforce their ability to do oversight, as I discussed before. There's just no ability to enforce it. In fact, the only ability to enforce it, is with the Department of Justice, which reports directly to the executive. So if the Department of Justice, if there is not that bright line, and many of us will recall back in the 70s when Nixon was about to be impeached, he attempted to fire, and in fact did fire, the Attorney General, because the Attorney General would not do his bidding. And I think the replacement for that Attorney General would not do his bidding. And Nixon had to go down several levels to get to one who finally would do his bidding. And, that was such a red flag at that time that in a bipartisan fashion, the Congress acted as they should. But now we have this situation again, and we have ultimate partisanship on top of that, and they're not acting as they should. Now, I have to say that just today and yesterday, a bit of a crack appeared in this situation between the executive and the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, and I hope that that's real, and I hope it will resolve itself. But this has been very disturbing to watch happen, to watch the Attorney General of the United States not respect that traditional bright line. The purposeful politicization of the federal bureaucracy has also been very difficult to watch. And that is not just what normally happens. What normally happens is that new executive comes in and they will certainly replace the cabinet, absolutely. It rarely happens otherwise. But going below that with political appointees, especially political appointees who are not in any way qualified to do what they're being appointed to do, has led to a lot of under the covers damage that is going to become much more apparent in years to come, because the people in those departments, whether it's the FDA or the CDC, Homeland Security, whatever it might be, are leaving because it's become political. It's not a good working situation. They can't stand up for the right thing anymore without a fear of not just dismissal, but ruin, having their reputation ruined. And we've seen this happen again and again. And I'm sure it's happened before, but I certainly don't recall it as a way of life in the federal bureaucracy. And it doesn't just represent a political problem; it represents a capability problem for our country. How long will it take the CDC to get back to being what it was? Can it ever do that? And there's many, many such departments that have been affected in this way. And the last one I'll talk about here in this first show is the creation of state media, and that I don't think that's ever happened before. Certainly there's no way that I could say that there's never been a cozy relationship between the executive or majority leaders and the press, but never a beck and call, say only what I want you to say relationship 24/7. And of course, the creation of the state media, and we all know what I'm talking about, is countered by so many other media outlets that are, a minimum against the executive. It's just it's not a good situation to have media playing the role that they're playing right now, which is a role that makes people afraid, makes them very anxious, makes them very angry. At least those not smart enough to limit their exposure. But I think more and more, and so this is something that our founders could not have foreseen, is the incredible role of media in our lives and in our democracy, and the real chance for that to forcefully persuade. It makes you think back to television advertising of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s as, wow, that was tame by comparison. Yeah, we were definitely, affected by it. We definitely were, our behavior was changed by it, but now that's personal. It's personal, through the social media and that type of thing. Okay, so those are, I'm not even going to say those are my top 10. Some of the most compelling you'll hear tomorrow. But those are some of the things that have me convinced that we're in real danger here. And again, many of these did not start recently. They started a while back, or perhaps in some way have always been there. When I talk about our executive, he's not the first one that showed some character problems. Certainly Richard Nixon comes to mind, Bill Clinton comes to mind. But people all have flaws. People all make mistakes, but not to the extent that we're seeing now. So, anyway, all right, that's our program for this evening, and I'm just going to look and see if there's any comments that we might be able to respond to here. If anybody wants to make one, go right ahead. So Stephen asks about the Electoral College and my thoughts on it. And, I a few years ago, I would have said, if something's not broke, don't fix it. And the Electoral College had, a reason for that was the way, I was under the impression for a long time in my life that we were a one person, one vote country. But we're really not, because of the Electoral College. What is supposed to happen, of course, is the people of a state vote one way or another, say for the executive, and those, whoever wins the majority gets their slate of electors, which are people appointed. That's who goes to the Electoral College, this party's electors. Well, now, because of ultimate partisanship, and this is a really good example of how these things feed on each other, how it becomes an echo chamber because of all these things interacting together. State houses, state senates, the state governments in our country are literally contemplating taking over, if there's any mail fraud with the voting, to put their own slate of electors in. So it could happen that a Republican state government puts in a Republican slate of electors when, in fact, the Democrats won the state vote. And that makes me feel not good about the Electoral College. But the Electoral College, also does protect, we have 50 states, but most of our population is on the coast. And if they're wasn't an electoral college, then simply a very small number of states on the coast, the huge states with huge populations would control everything. And I do think it's better that they not. I think we have a whole country here, not just 6 or 8 states on the coasts. That's a great question, and one of the topics that I hope to have and hope to have people join us on. Okay. Um, Judy asks if I have seen the Comey rule, and I believe I did see the Comey rule. And of course, that is, came from Hollywood, but was consistent with a lot of things that I think we know about that situation, which is just flat out not a good situation. I think Mr. Comey made some pretty significant mistakes, and mistakes that in some ways led to the situation that we're in now. So, but yes, I did see that, Judy. I thought it was pretty good. Well, it looks like there's a really good discussion on chat here about the Electoral College, and I'm willing to bet that many of these folks know a lot more about it than I do. All right, well, listen, thank you for joining us on the inaugural edition of Constitution Time. I will be back here tomorrow, which is Friday, October 16th at 5 o'clock p.m. to do part 2. And I'm glad that our channel got set up correctly so I can use it. And I'm glad I had a chance to redo episode 1 here. So hopefully the quality of the video and everything's been a little bit better. Folks, thank you for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.